Hi guys, it's Angie with Fun Endeavors Tie-Dye Lab. Today I'm going to make a couple different ice-dyed spiral shirts for the 4th of July. So normally I liquid dye my spiral shirts for the 4th of July so that my red can be true red and my blue can be true blue, and so that I have some white left on the shirt. You know, it's a little tougher sometimes to get white to remain on the shirt when you ice dye it. So I'm also going to use a different tool to make my spirals with. I've made a mark on my shirt where I'd like to start my spiral using a washable marker. And for these shirts, I'm going to use a pair of locking hemostats that have a coating on the ends of them. I'm also going to use a microwave splatter guard that has a hole in the center. I'm going to place the splatter guard down over the top of the mark that I made with the washable marker. Then I'm going to attach the hemostats onto that mark, lock them down, and begin to spiral the shirt. As I'm spiraling the shirt with one hand, I'm using my other hand to make additional folds in the shirt. The coating on the hemostats is going to keep the hemostats from ripping a hole in my shirt. I purchased the hemostats from Amazon, and I'll leave a link down below in the description for this video for where I purchased them. Once I have the shirt spiraled, I'm going to hold the folds in place with some rubber bands. Before I place this shirt aside and tie the next one, I'm going to use my washable marker and divide my shirt into 4 sections, taking the lines down through the center of the spiral. When each of my lines goes down through the center of the spiral, that means all the colors are going to originate from the same area. I started this spiral down in the lower portion of the shirt, but for this next shirt, I'm going to start the spiral in the middle. So I'm using my washable marker again and going to make a mark where I'd like the center of the spiral to be. I like to put it just a little bit below the armpit of the shirt, or level with the armpit of the shirt, whichever one you prefer. I'm going to use the same pair of hemostats and the same splatter guard that I did on the last shirt. By the way, I forgot to mention that when I place the splatter guard over the top of the shirt, I place it with the flat side against the shirt. What that's going to do is that's going to help to keep all of the folds about the same height. I'm going to go ahead and speed this part of the video up because it's basically the same as for the last shirt. Whenever I tie a spiral, there's usually one messier side and one flat side. The flat side is always the side of the shirt that was against the table. In this case, I placed the front side of the shirt down so that the front side of the shirt would be the flatter and cleaner looking side of the spiral. I'm going to make a split spiral for this shirt, so I'm going to turn the shirt over to the flatter side of the spiral, and I'm going to draw a circle around the spiral. You can make this circle as big as you want to. If you want to go a little further out on the shirt or a little closer into the center of the spiral, that is your personal preference. I'm kind of trying to split my shirt in half. So I'm trying to make the circle about halfway in between the center of the spiral and the outer folds of the shirt. Then I'm going to draw lines going through the center of the spiral, and I'm going to divide my shirt into 8 different sections, or 8 wedge type shapes. I didn't dye these shirts immediately, but they also weren't completely dry, so they were barely damp. Like I said, I'm going to use patriotic colors, but on this first shirt, I'm not going to use all 4 of these colors. I'm only going to use fire red and midnight blue. And like I said, I want to try to see if I can leave some white on these shirts. So I'm going to place fire red in one section, and across from that one section, I'm going to place the midnight blue. I'm going to leave 2 sections completely white. Now, I'm kind of running a little bit of an experiment with these shirts and seeing if I can get some white left without doing something to try to prevent any color bleed. If you'd really like to make sure that you have quite a bit of white left, there's a couple things that I would do. I would either use some just plain water and put them in the sections that I want to remain white. Just put you some plain water into a squirt bottle and squirt it on those areas. Or you could use a little bit of Dawn dish soap water. Take a little bit of plain water, stick a little bit of Dawn dish soap down in the water. And because Dawn dish soap is pH neutral, it's going to kind of neutralize that area and keep the dye from bonding in that area. The third thing that you can do is use some thickened water, which is where you just take plain water and you thicken it with a little bit of sodium alginate, and that will try to prevent or keep the dye from going over into that area. In general, dye likes to move from a wet area to a dry area. It likes to dampen that area. So if you've already placed something there, either the sodium alginate, the Dawn dish soap water, or just the plain water, it's going to kind of deter that dye from going all the way over into that area. Think of it like having a wet sponge, how a wet sponge won't just continue to soak up more liquid. That's what happens when you add something to those white areas. Like I said, I want to kind of conduct an experiment and see if I can keep some white areas by ice dyeing the shirt and not doing liquid dye and not trying to prevent any of that spillage into that white space. So once I have the dye on the shirt, I'm going to add a little bit of additional dry soda ash over the top of the dye. But I'm not going to put it over the top of the white areas. Here again, I don't really want to promote dye bonding with that area. The shirt has been soaked in soda ash, so if dye gets over there, it's going to bond, but I don't want to encourage that. Now I'm going to add on some ice, and I'm going to start by adding the ice onto the white areas. Maybe if I dampen that just a little bit before I add the ice to the dye, that will kind of hinder some of the dye moving over into that area. Like I said, I'm kind of using these shirts as an experiment. I know how to keep white on shirts that I'm going to liquid dye, but I want to do a little experimenting with these ice dyed ones. So once I have all the ice on the top, I'm going to place the shirt aside and allow the ice to melt. And let's go ahead and dye the other shirt. For this shirt, I'm going to add in the other two colors. So I'm also using Chinese Red and Houdini Blue. By the way, these are all Dharma Trading Company colors, and I'm going to make myself an ice barrier for this shirt. I did for the last shirt too, I just forgot to mention it. I used my silicone cake molds, attached them together, wrapped them around the shirt, and then held them together with a wooden clothespin. I'll put links to these down below in the description for the video as well. I had a brilliant idea to mark my different sections so that I wouldn't get mixed up when I was applying the dye, but the sections are small and the marker is big, so I couldn't really read what I wrote. So I just kind of had to keep tabs on what I was doing. I'm going to start by applying Fire Red to the outer portion of two of the sections. And I'm going to apply it to two sections that are across from each other. By the way, since my sections are kind of small, I'm using some of my really small lab spoons to apply the dye. I really love these stainless steel lab spoons. The dye doesn't seem to stick to them quite as badly as it does plastic spoons, and they come in all different sizes. I have some that are pretty big and then these which are fairly small. Some of my spoons have spatulas at the end too, which is really nice if I just want a little touch of dye added someplace. So I promise I'm going to come back and add more Fire Red across from this Fire Red. But to kind of keep my design straight, I'm going to go ahead and apply Chinese Red to two of the sections across from each other in the small area. So just like on the last shirt, I'm going to leave white in between all the colored areas. So I'll have 4 areas of color or 4 pie pieces of color on this shirt and 4 white areas of color on this shirt. And what I'm doing is I'm placing red on the outside on 2 of the sections that have dye and red on the inside on 2 of the sections with dye. Then obviously I'm going to add blue to the inside and blue to the outside. And just like with the last shirt, I'm not going to do anything to the white areas. I'm not going to add any water, Dawn water, or thickened water. Okay, so I'm going back and adding my fire red to the other section, and then I'm going to start on the blue sections. So with the way that I'm applying this dye, what I'm going to have happen on my shirt is I'm going to have a line or a spiral come out from the center, and it's either going to start out red or blue, and partway through that line, it's going to change to the other color. So let's say my Chinese red spiral is going to start out Chinese red, and then partway it's going to change into Houdini blue. And my other spirals are going to start out as midnight blue and change into fire red. So in the smaller sections where I use the fire red on the outside, I'm applying midnight blue to the inside. And on the areas where I used Chinese red on the small part, I'm going to use Houdini blue in the large areas. That's why I call it a split spiral, is because the spiral splits into a different color partway through. I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of additional dry soda ash over the top, and then I'm going to add on some ice. If you'll notice, when I applied the dye to the shirt, I didn't add a whole bunch of dye to the center. Part of the reason for that is sometimes when you add a lot of dye to the very center portion of a spiral, you'll kind of get a muddy spiral right in the middle, and I don't want that. The other thing is I didn't want my colors to really mix, so I haven't added quite as much dye to the center portion. It's also not quite as easy to go ahead and apply the ice to the white areas before I do the dyed areas on this shirt. All these spaces are pretty small, so I'm just applying ice to the top. I'm going to place this shirt aside and allow the ice to melt along with the other shirt. After the first layer of ice melted, I came back and added a second layer of ice to each shirt. I've included some process photos so that you can see how the shirts look after the first layer melted and after the second layer of ice melted. The first 3 photos are of the first shirt that I dyed. The second 3 photos are of the second shirt that I dyed. Okay, so it looks like I have quite a bit of color over into my white spaces. So I'm curious to see how much white I'm going to end up with. I'm going to rinse the shirts in the same order in which I dyed them. So I'm taking the first shirt to my utility sink, and when I flip it over, you can see there's a lot of color on the back. But I'm not going to place the shirt down in the sink. At first, I'm going to hold it in my hand, and I'm going to rinse the white areas with just plain cold water. I'm rinsing with cold water to rinse out the soda ash. Once I've rinsed the white areas, I'm going to rinse the entire shirt really well with cold water. And once I've rinsed with cold water pretty well, then I can place the shirt down in the sink. What I don't want happening is I don't want there to still be soda ash remaining in the shirt and me to just take the shirt and plop it down in the sink and all of those dye colors to rinse out of the shirt and onto the white area. You know, I think that's probably one of the questions I get asked the most, is how to keep the white areas white. And there's a couple sciencey kind of things that you need to understand. For fiber reactive dye to bond properly with the fabric, it has to have soda ash to raise the pH, and it has to have heat to bond the dye color to the fabric. So if the very first thing I do is rinse out all the soda ash, then it's going to be a little bit difficult for that dye to bond to the white areas. So that's what I'm doing. I'm rinsing out the soda ash before I warm my water up to hot. After I rinsed in cold, I went ahead and untied the shirt and continued rinsing in cold just a little bit to make sure I didn't have any residual soda ash underneath some of those rubber band lines. At that point, I can go ahead and warm the water up to hot to try to rinse out the excess dye that didn't bond with the fabric. So you know I don't like to just continue to rinse for a long time. So what I'm going to do is in the other side of my sink, I'm going to run some really hot water in the sink, add some pH neutral Blue Dawn dish soap to the water, and place the shirt down inside. The Blue Dawn dish soap is going to try to hinder or help hinder any of the dye that's soaked out of the shirt from rebonding someplace else on the shirt. Then I'm going to start rinsing the second shirt, and I'm going to do it the same way. If you'll notice, I have quite a bit of dye on the back side of the shirt. And because I do, I'm going to start rinsing those white areas on the front side of the shirt. I don't want to rinse that dye down through the shirt and onto my white spaces. If I just came in and I started immediately rinsing this shirt in really hot water, if I still have active dye left in the shirt and I still have a lot of soda ash remaining in the shirt, I can essentially do kind of like a hot water irrigation process without really meaning to. So I would potentially end up dyeing or at least tinting my white areas and white spaces with either red dye or blue dye. So once I have this shirt rinsed out, I'm going to go ahead and untie it, rinse it in the hot water as well, and then I'm going to place it over in the other side of the sink with the other shirt that I just rinsed out. I'm going to allow both shirts to soak in the really hot water, and when the water cools off, I'm going to change it out. Each time I change out the water, I'm going to add a little bit more Blue Dawn dish soap to the water, and I'm going to continue that process until my water remains almost clear. Then I'm going to place both of the shirts along with some Dharma's Professional Textile Detergent into my washing machine. The Dharma's Professional Textile Detergent is a pH neutral textile detergent, so it's going to act like the Blue Dawn does, except on a larger scale in the washing machine. I'm going to wash these shirts on a hot water cycle, and then I'm going to put them in the dryer to dry. So both of the shirts have been washed, dried, and ironed, and let's see what they ended up looking like. Okay, so here's the first shirt where I only used 2 colors. And what do you guys think? I think it looks pretty good. I am really surprised I have as much white as I do on this shirt. I was honestly thinking I was probably not going to have this much, but I think it looks really good. I do have a few little flecks of red and blue in the white area, and part of the reason for that is those crazy lines from the rubber bands. As hard as I try, I keep hitting those rubber bands when I'm applying the dye, and little flecks go flying. So this is another reason why I prefer kite string over rubber bands. Rubber bands just tend to be a little bit easier when doing spirals though. So you'll also see that both of the colors originate from that same center spiral, and I didn't add a ton of dye to that area, so the lines coming out of that center of the spiral are pretty thin. But I don't think that looks bad. So overall, I would consider this shirt a win. I really like it, and let's look at the second one. Okay, so this is the split spiral, and I think this one looks really cool too. I like the split spiral design. And I honestly am surprised I have as much white left on this one as I do as well. I mean, the back side of that shirt looked very fully dyed. I do have some of the color splits that came out of both of these colors on both of the shirts. So the midnight blue will bleed a little bit of like pinky purple color, and the fire red has a little bit of yellow. I see the yellow fairly clearly on this split spiral shirt, but I don't think that looks bad. The Chinese red is a little bit more of a pink red, and I actually prefer the fire red a little bit better. I just wanted to use a second red on this shirt. I also ended up with some really cool shapes up kind of going into the center of the spiral. They almost look like little flower petals or something. I don't know, it's cool. The center of this spiral isn't super defined either, and that's because I didn't add a lot of dye into that space. Also, the coated hemostats are a little bit fatter than the locking tweezers that I use, so it makes that center spiral area a little bit bulkier. I mean, fatter, larger. I don't really know how to explain it, but it's not as minute and precise in the center with the larger hemostats. But I don't mind that. I still think it looks really good right there. Do you see now why I call this a split spiral? How you see like the red or the blue originating from the center and then changing over to the opposite color? I think that's really cool. It takes a few minutes looking at the shirt to realize kind of what's going on. And I think that makes your shirt more interesting to look at. I've included some photos of the shirts together. And I have to tell you, one thing that I really like about ice dyeing these shirts is the dye movement coming out of the center of the spiral. I really love, like on the first shirt, how the blue is streaking across the shirt. And then I see more of the red doing that streaking part on the second shirt that I dyed. And I think that's really cool. I don't get quite as much of that when I liquid dye. The dye may move a little bit out of the original space where I placed it, but not in long streaks like happen on the ice dyed shirts. I think that's an effect that is pretty interesting to look at. And as far as my experiment to see if I could keep white areas on the shirt, I'm pretty happy with that as well. I mean, obviously my white areas are not as large as my colored areas, but I definitely still have white areas left on the shirt. And these shirts are definitely red, white, and blue. So I would say that's a success as well. I don't mind the color splits on these shirts. I know that Dharma makes other reds and blues that don't split, and I think that's great. You know, if you want to have a pure red with no splits, then by all means, use some of those colors. But I have started using fire red and midnight blue for my patriotic shirts years ago, and so they're just kind of my favorites. However, I have to say, I really like this Houdini blue. I think that's a really pretty color too, and I wouldn't mind using that in place of the midnight blue from now on. So overall, I really like both of these shirts. I would consider them successes as ice dyes, and I think they will be great shirts to wear for the 4th of July. But what do you guys think? Please drop me some comments down below and let me know. And I hope I helped you with trying to keep your white areas white. So if you've enjoyed the video, I sure would appreciate it if you would like it and if you'd subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you'll hit the bell, you'll receive a notification whenever I upload a new video. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great day.